Welcome to this Everybody and Growing unit. So this is in this unit, we'll start addressing this idea of systemic racism. And before we kind of address systemic racism, we kind of want to talk about what is this thing called race. And so how was race constructed? What does it mean to have or be or hold a particular race? And how have systems used race to help identify who has access to goods, jobs, services, and money, and who doesn't, right? So when we think about this idea of race, it has a purpose. And so when you think about this idea of race, aren't we all human? Aren't we the same human family? And I would suggest that science obviously supports that notion. However, we do recognize that there are differences between human beings. And so when you look at these individuals and at the bottom of the screen, one of the things you might recognize is that they have different phenotypes, that they look a little bit different. But in all actuality, it is exactly the same person. And so when we think about this notion of race, what really does race mean? What does it offer us that could be helpful? And so when we think about race, we have to think about how race is used. And oftentimes it's used or built into systems that we refer to as racism. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that in this unit. So what's the difference between like systemic racism and individual racism? Individual racism is, in fact, that, right? So individuals have the right to think, feel, and unfortunately, they can't act in any way they want to based on their racial consciousness. And so individuals' beliefs, attitudes, and actions or intentions which subordinates another person or group because of their color, their race, or their ethnicity. This is individual racism. This can occur both as unconscious and conscious and can be passive or active. An example, telling jokes using racial connotations, right? So that's the objective of that from an individual standpoint is to belittle someone else and actually to raise yourself up. And then systemic racism is a network of structures, policies, and practices that create advantages for a dominant group and disadvantages for people who are not in the dominant group. This disadvantage is embedded within society and creates and breeds discrimination, oppression, and has a long-lasting negative effect. And the example that we'll be kind of using in this section is redlining. So the process of determining who can live where or what property values look like based on race. And so I should not be able to look at a zip codes or a map and tell where you live and what that means about your economic status, if not but for some of these systemic issues in ways that we've developed our society. So here are a few things to know about race. That race, in fact, is not biological, right? So it's not biological. It is kind of this geopolitical concept. So it changes from place to place, from nation state to nation state, and there's actually some economics tied to this idea of race, and race takes on many forms. There are many ways in which race and racism interact to create these systemic issues and problems that we're dealing with today. And so, as a part of your homework, we want you to look through this PDF called "The History and Construction of Race and Racism" and see how the definition of races has really contributed to the challenge that racism produces. And so, if race is the currency, then racism becomes the economy, right? And so those are important things to kind of think about. How race and ethnicity has been defined over time has changed, even in our own census. There has not been a consistent categorization for particular races or specific races. For example, I would say African Americans is very interesting that over time, the name of my group has constantly changed, but I've never filled out a form to make that an official change of my identity. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for engaging in this unit. We'll make sure that the PDF is available. We ask you to read that PDF about the history of race and racism, and give us your thoughts about that. This is Andre Koen. I want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time as we assure that everybody gets in. All right, talk to you soon.